Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Everyday Adventure Podcast. Steven here. So excited to have you joining us today. Today I'm going to introduce you to a guest named Jessica Turner. She is somebody I just recently met, and after hearing her story, I really felt that she was a perfect fit for the podcast. And I'm so excited for you to get to hear about her journey. She just wrote a book called Blackbird, Learning to Fly Above Depression and Anxiety. And whether you have dealt with mental health struggles of your own, or you know somebody who does, this episode is going to shed some light on a topic that sometimes is hard to talk about. In this episode, Jessica dives into parts of her story. Some of them are very significant. There's a lot of hurt that she uncovers in this podcast, but really it's all to show how shedding light on the things that are deep within us sometimes is what it takes for God to bring healing into our story and into our life. And so I really believe that this conversation can spark not only some healing and wholeness, but also some conversations that are necessary around these topics. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Dr. Jessica Turner. I'm with Jessica Turner. How are you doing, Jessica?
Doing great. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, and it's great to be in the virtual world with you. And I'm just so excited about what's going on in your life and what's going on with your brand new book, Blackbird. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's very surreal over here. Like a lot of pinch me moments because it's been in the works for close to 10 years. So
I was in your shoes 4 months ago in kind of that build up in the last final stretch. And so what is this final stretch of kind of getting ready to launch a book? What does that feel like compared to the last 2 years of actually doing the work and doing all the writing?
I just turned 40 almost 2 weeks ago, and every year that I would celebrate a birthday, this book was the thing that like hung over my head. But you still haven't written this book. Because truly, almost 9 years ago, I had a moment in a bookstore where I felt like I am supposed to write this book. Ironically, half the stuff that's in the book didn't even happen yet at that point. So God's timing is always perfect.
Yeah.
But it was just always that thing that was like nagging me when my birthday would come along, and to celebrate, launching it in that month, and to be able to finally like just say I actually did it. Like it's just phenomenal, and it's really not even like out in people's hands yet. So we're just kind of starting to see like the ripple effect that's going to happen from it.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to kind of talk about not just the book, but the heart behind the book and the heart of your own story. And so what kind of was the kickoff to actually saying, like, I want to take this story of mine and this journey of mine and put it in a book? Because we all have a story. We all have some sort of journey that we're on, but rarely does it become a book. And I think it's a beautiful thing when it does. So what kind of led to that?
Oh, okay. I'll try to do like the shortened version. So I mentioned 9 years ago having a moment in a bookstore. My husband and I were in Cincinnati. We were wasting time trying to find coffee, and just Googling on our phone, and found it was a coffee place within a bookstore. And it was such a small coffee setup that they were like, oh, it's going to be a while before, whatever. So I love bookstores. I could live in a bookstore, but there was a table of banned books, and I mean, at least half of them were books that were like lifelines for me when I was a teenager. Perks of Being a Wallflower is one of them. Speak was another one. But it was always these topics. Most of them were fictional characters, but they were carrying some kind of secret or, something that I could relate to, just because I felt like I couldn't really talk to anybody about kind of these things that I was carrying. And in that moment, I was just like, man, I can't even imagine if I wouldn't have had these books. But I wish there was something. They spoke directly to the teenage me, but I needed a book when I was 11, when I was 28, when I have all these moments throughout my life where just really, dark times where I would have loved to have a book that was kind of like a companion, but also like a, here's what you could do to get out of, this season, or to survive this season and actually come out, with growth that you could be proud of. And so that's kind of what Blackbird is. It's my whole it's my whole life. It's just exploring my journal with a lot of topics within mental health, and what that journey has looked like, and finding healing, but also understanding that healing's like a lifelong process as well.
Yeah, and I mean the subtitle of the book is Learning to Fly Above Depression and Anxiety. And I know there's people that are listening that are dealing with those things or have dealt with those things or know somebody who is. And from your story and through your story, what is kind of the turning point for you? Like that went from this past struggle that you are reflecting on to like, all right, now I'm in this healing journey.
So the writing process was extremely eye-opening and actually part of my healing. So I roughly 10 years ago, I actually admitted, okay, I have some baggage that I really need to like pause and deal with. And that kind of came to a head because I just had my twin girls and I was dealing with postpartum depression that wasn't really like identified until I was like 8, 9 months out. Because people kept just telling me, well, no, you have twins. Like, this is just what it, like it's supposed to be hard.
Right.
But it was a lot more than that. But that kind of started this like, okay, but why do I struggle with this? And, why do I have this tendency to do this? And it slowly started like uncovering these layers that I don't think I recognized at that point. I think I was in survival mode for so long, going through veterinary school and just trying to figure out real life and marriage, that it took that experience after my girls to kind of like make something come to a head. But at the same time, I have a pretty significant traumatic event that happened when I was 21. I found my roommate at the time after a suicide attempt. And so like that's always been, I call it like the elephant in my mind. Like I knew it happened. I never dealt with it. I wasn't able to.
Wow.
I was already like trying to survive that season. So like I've always known that was there, but I always blamed my struggles on events. Like I blamed a lot of stuff on that event. Like, well, yeah, no wonder I'm screwed up. Like this happens, but never really dug into like the long-term like consequences, how it changed how I saw myself, how I saw the world. So I started this journey and recognized very early on that I wasn't in a place where I could deal with that big traumatic event. So I started with smaller things. I started with just trying to get through that season of postpartum depression. In that process, I uncovered that I had a history of disordered eating that took root when I was 10. So I kind of like slowly pulled these things out and started giving them the attention they deserved, and started going to counseling. I was in counseling for over 2 years. I would go at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on what else was going on, in my life. So like I felt like I was doing good. I was doing the work, like I was making progress.
Yeah.
I did specific trauma therapy. Like I got to a point where I was ready to tackle that event and worked through that. And so like I thought that was my turning point, honestly. But then I had a sequence of events back to back to back in 2021 that made it very clear that I was so far from any place of healing. I had made a lot of progress, but
yeah,
I had a miscarriage that really, I was not prepared for what it did to me. And then I think the amount of impact it had on me was part of the issue, because I could not understand why do people experience this all the time and I like can't function I just don't understand like what's wrong with me. I kind of went back to that like narrative,
Yeah.
and I journaled every day during that season, and I actually found 8 or 9 journals from when I was a kid, like a young preteen teenager, right when I started writing Blackbird. So when I started writing it, I was going into it with, I've always dealt with these things. They've always been tied to these events. And this is my journey of working through those events and being able to learn things to be able to, still live a full life. But
Yeah.
when I got those journals from when I was young, long before all these events happened, it became very clear that I was fighting something when I was 10. Like there's journal entries that do not make sense. Um, Talking about one of the best days of my life. I mean, like detail after detail. And then I got home and cried my eyes out. And it's like, what? Who does that? Like, that's not
Right.
a normal response. So writing Blackbird actually forced me to come to terms that it these events played a huge role, but they weren't the cause. There's always been a root that it took me being, just shy of 40, like having to face my past like head on in these
Yeah.
written entries to truly embrace the fact that like depression and anxiety they've always been a part of who I am. And different events have definitely impacted them and made them louder and had greater consequences come out of it. But I say in the book, I could have had the best childhood ever, and I had a wonderful childhood, wonderful parents, and I still would have struggled because I still struggled.
Right.
So I know that's a
Well,
big answer, but it's been a journey for me writing this book. I'll just say that.
yeah, talk about those journals though, because I obviously opening up just a portal to your past and to your pain and to your story. So what was it within those journals that you kind of were processing, or what did you take away from those?
So I always knew they were there. For as long as I could remember, I would write. I loved reading. I loved writing. Part of me never really wanted to find them, but when I made the commitment to write this book, I knew I had all of those entries from what I went through in 2021. And I knew just the raw, unfiltered glimpse they provide into what it truly feels like to deal with these things for somebody that doesn't, because you just can't understand if you've never walked through it. So it was kind of my attempts to not only meet people where they're at, but also to like shed light for people that just they can't comprehend what it's like. So I was like, okay, I need to find these because deep down I think I knew there might be some clues like that, but honestly I was just hoping that it would have been like, playing with dolls and
Yeah.
all the things. There was a decent chunk of my, like, when I was 13, at that point I was like spiraling, and I remember that I just wasn't prepared for it being so early, like 10 years old. And my girls are 11. They're about to turn 12. And like
Yeah.
all I could think of was them when I read these entries. And it just, oh, it broke me. It was hard. It brought a lot of understanding. And then now, as an adult, and all the work that I've done on myself, I understand, like, I'm so self aware. I understand my temperament. I understand my needs. And so bringing that understanding into those journals, like going through them, knowing those things allowed me to like extend grace because I understood why I felt the way I did and why I ended up making, like, I'd made really stupid decisions when I was very young. And I have all of that in those pages. And I remembered big picture moments, but I forgot all the little details. And again, I think the hardest part was just seeing my girls, like they're literally right behind where I was, like doing drugs and, like turning to really destructive things at a really early age because I didn't know what to do with my emotions. I didn't know how to handle myself because I didn't feel like I was like anybody else. So I explore all that in Blackbird. It's very much it's a memoir woven in with like a lot of science-based research and teachings. And so I talk about, if you struggle with depression, you're this much more likely to have an eating disorder too, to struggle with substance abuse. Like there's huge correlations. And I think people are walking around only getting half of the treatment they really need. And so just trying to bring light on some of those topics. Those journals kind of guided a lot of the beginning of my book because I wanted to explore these topics. And I'm like, I mean, it just makes sense that other people would benefit from understanding more about these connections and what are the basic psychological needs, and
Right.
why does that matter? Like understanding mine, my main one is the need for significance. And I desperately needed somebody from outside of my family to tell me I was good enough. I was worthy enough, and so unfortunately I turned to destructive manners to find that significance.
Well, I think just going back even here a little bit, you talked about how after you had your twins, people are like, oh, this is, you have two kids. Like, of course it's hard. And just the idea of embracing the reality and being honest with yourself about what was truly happening. And, something that not only do you talk about, something I really believe is that really healing begins with honesty. And rarely does God heal what we won't reveal. He obviously goes above time and above any circumstances, but in my life, it's been the times that I've actually come to him and revealed the need and revealed the hurt or revealed the pain or revealed the sin or the struggle that I've actually started to feel his healing presence in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's so many people that maybe are listening to this and that are going to continue their journey with the wrong directions, with the wrong set of directions on how to be well. Because if you were just to stick with, all right, yeah, this is just normal, this will pass, there'd be a lot of things that wouldn't add up, that wouldn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
and that those things wouldn't just get better as phases of life level out. But you had to deal with the actual real thing of postpartum depression and the real thing of the emotional unhealth and the mental unhealth. And so talk about just that part of your own story and how that relates to somebody else, of embracing the reality of, no, this is where I'm actually at.
It's really important to pause and see where your comparison is coming from when you're trying to figure out if something's normal, because something that's normal for you is not necessarily normal for me. Because for so long, my only reference was two other twin moms. Their kids were young too. And their experience was like night and day from mine. And so they're over here telling me, oh, yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be easier and blah, blah, blah. And, and so for months, I would, if anything, it made me even more discouraged because I would look at them and I'm like, but how are they able to go back to work and do, so finally I was like, but I don't think they're, like comparing my situation to them makes any sense anymore. So
Yeah.
finally I reached out in a mom group and asked in there and they were like, absolutely, you need to like call your doctor now. Like,
Right.
like get help now. And so make sure your definition of normal even makes sense in the first place. Like who are you basing it off
Yeah.
of? That type of thing. But I do want to say, so when I had my twins, I've always believed in God. I always knew of Jesus, but I did not have like a good relationship. I'd say some recited prayers and that was about it. When I truly started my healing journey, like in 2019 ish, like going to counseling, I made sure I went to a Christian counselor. That was super important to me. I had a relationship with Christ at that point. And so I do believe that he has to be a part of the equation to experience any wholeness when it comes to dealing with these things. So when I first came to terms with where I was at with my postpartum depression, I went back to things that I knew were healthy methods of helping me move forward. So really, like, exercise was really big for me before I got pregnant. I was on bed rest my whole pregnancy. So like that stopped overnight, which looking back really jacked me up. And I reflect on that, like there's so many different factors that people need to like just look at the big picture when you're trying to like sort through what you're dealing with. But really focused on being active, taking control of my nutrition, those kinds of things, personal development. So I was doing a lot of the right things, but like Jesus still wasn't really part of the equation at that point. And so I made huge steps in the right direction, but it wasn't until I keep referring back to 2019 because my roommate that attempted when I was 21, she survived that, but she was successful in 2019. And so that brought all of that like full force, started having flashbacks, so I finally recognized, okay, I actually have PTSD as well on top of these other things. It's not just, you experienced this, like I had deep rooted things that I needed to deal with. I didn't recognize that I was constantly in a state of anxiety because any glimpse of a loss of control brought me back to that day. So there was like some really deep rooted things I needed to deal with. And I was very close to Jesus at that point. I had stepped away from vet med. I believe my kids were like at least in some kind of half days. So like I would literally spend my mornings just sitting with God and reading the word. And so I think that was huge for me, even being able to take that step into getting, the attention and resources I needed, because I don't think I could have handled it back then. So we have to reveal what we need and bring him into the equation. But he's also such a good father as far as like, he's not going to like reveal everything at once. Like when you start doing the digging, because he knows what you're capable of handling. And yes, like we lean on him and, like our limitations aren't there when we lean on him. But at the same time, like I think he takes all of that into consideration. So for example, one of the things I talk about in Blackbird or like the roots of depression, and one of the biggest one is unresolved grief. But it's not just the grief of a person. Like it's the loss of anything that was significant to you. And so I never recognized until I had my son, like 8 years after my girls, and after my miscarriage, that I carried a degree of bitterness and resentment because my pregnancy with my girls and my postpartum experience was so far from what I ever pictured. Like it was horrible. All of it, honestly, was just horrible. And I would see moms with one kid and I'd be mad. Like, and for a while I was mad at God. I was like, why did you think that I could handle this? But I didn't recognize, and like, it's so hard not to get like emotional.
No, it's totally fine. This is your story.
I didn't recognize how much I had missed out on them, and just like on pregnancy, like the good parts of pregnancy. I went into preterm labor at like 26 weeks. And so my girls are a miracle, but I was literally in and out of the hospital the whole time, always thinking they were coming and if they would even survive, So that right there, and I talk about all of this, huge red flag. Like if you're dealing with a traumatic pregnancy, like your odds of experience postpartum depression are super high. I didn't know that. Like So
Right.
like I talk about all of those things because people need to like talk about this kind of stuff and be more proactive. I didn't recognize how much healing I still needed in that season of my life until I had my son, and God restored all of that. And I don't know that I would have experienced that restoration if God wasn't a part of the equation, is kind of like what I wanted to bring home with, that
Yeah.
question.
Being in the space where you are addressing mental health, like what do you feel like some of the misconceptions are when it comes to mental health? Maybe somebody's listening that's dealt with depression, anxiety, or maybe somebody hasn't. What are the misconceptions?
One of my goals is to be a bridge within the church because I've definitely been on the receiving end of well-meaning, like dear friends of mine, typically older ladies, that are like, well, you just need to pray more or read your Bible
Right.
more, or, and so early on in my journey with like growing in my faith and trying to navigate all these things that are like wrong with me, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I guess my faith isn't enough. Like I'm still not, like I still struggle with all the things. Like I think I'm better and then something happens and I'm not. And I felt like I was doing something wrong in regards to my relationship with Christ because I was still struggling. And then one day he revealed to me that all of this is my thorn in my side and it requires me to lean on him. And ever since then I'm fine. I'm okay with it being part of my story and part of my struggle. It's so complex. There's so many factors that go into play. I talk about some of the like mental health and mental health disorders need to be viewed just as like diabetes and a broken bone and all the things, like it's the same. It's a condition that affects the body in a physical manner just because you can't
Wow.
like
Yeah.
see the brain. But there's research out there, and I include some of these things because I think it's important to understand, one, as somebody that struggles with it, but there are certain parts of the brain that have been shown to be smaller in people that suffer with depression, and how that ties to like healthy memory incorporation. And like it's so complex. So for the outsider, I want them to recognize that. Like it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, you need to be more grateful, or you can't be
Right.
anxious and gracious, like thankful at the same time. Like sayings like that really, I think, make the situation worse. But for someone that is in the middle of it and deals with it, there's actually a whole lot we could control. Like there's a whole lot we can't control, but there is a lot we can do to move ourselves in a forward, positive manner. And I mean, literally so many things. We can rewire those faulty pathways. We can establish, centers in our brain that are gonna instinctively focus on the good versus the bad. And that's where I think your message, goes so well with mine, with that everyday presence and just not taking the mundane for granted.
How do we practically move towards healing? But maybe
Mhm.
two or three things that really have been the most impactful for you or for others.
I am a big believer between like anybody benefiting from counseling. A lot of my self-awareness came from simply having someone that knew what questions to ask. I mean, I have 3 kids. My house is chaotic a lot of times, but in the past, if there was a lot of clutter or just a lot of like, you know, chaos that comes with having kids,
Yeah.
I could feel myself like reaching that point where I was like about to shut down because that's kind of my
Wow.
default. But I never recognized that a lot of that was tied to my PTSD. And my counselor helped me, like put those kinds of things together. I think even people that don't have anything major that they're unpacking, like there's things that we do every day that we don't stop long enough to say, okay, but what is the root of that? You know, I now know because of my temperament and because of my PTSD and kind of what that's done with my need for control, that I need a level of predictability and stability that is probably higher than most people. So I wake up at like 5 every morning, way before everybody else, and I read my Bible, I pray, whatever. I always read the word, but like what comes after that kind of looks different. But journaling is a huge, like even like equal with counseling, honestly. Like, and I even have specific exercises if you cannot stop obsessing over like this concern, like here's like a journal exercise you could do to where you could actually have action steps to move from like that place of worry to, okay, it's really not as big as I'm seeing it as. Like, worst case scenario is still really not that bad of a scenario. I journal most days. My journaling depends on what I need in that moment. But a lot of times it's literally just sitting down with what is in my head right now that's taking up space, that's not necessarily serving me. It helps me identify, like false belief systems that I'm maybe still struggling with, that I thought I had a better hand on, depending on what I'm going into that day or whatnot. But simply getting it out on paper, like it's really powerful for your brain to be able to like just get like a bigger perspective. And a lot of times my journaling is more like written prayers and just having that, okay, it really, like, it's not just me, like I could surrender all of this. Like, I may need to do it every hour. But again, something about writing those out, and being able to like look back at them and, like when you're going through it in the future, that you have those like physical markers of what you've gone through before and what he's brought you through. So yeah, journaling, I'm a huge advocate of journaling.
Well, and obviously, even just in your own story, coming back upon those old journals was painful, but it was part of your healing journey. It was part of
Yeah.
what's started to bring freedom and healing in your life. And something that you said is your wings are waiting, but first you have to face what's been keeping you grounded. And that's what I think a listener can hear today is what's keeping you grounded. We have to face those things, and you're proof, and your story's proof that there is a path forward, that there is healing ahead, that there is joy on the other side. But we do have to face those things. And so I just appreciate your willingness to share not only today, but I know the book is going to be a blessing for a lot of people as well. What do you hope somebody walks away reading Blackbird? That somebody picks up the book and they close that last page. What do you hope that they're feeling, thinking, and doing next?
I always wanted this to be a companion because so many times, especially after having my girls, I was convinced I was the only person dealing with, these struggles. I felt so isolated. And now I know like that's one of the enemy's biggest tactics,
Yeah.
isolation. If he could get you alone and get you to go down that pit, then you're where he wants you. But I want people to recognize that they're so far from the only one that is struggling, whether it's specific things that I talk about or not. Like, it's so common. It's just people don't, I learned that when I started sharing pieces of my story on social media over the last 10 years, I was like blown away by like the messages of like, oh yeah, I actually dealt with that too. Like, most of us do feel like we're the only ones. You may be someone that recognizes that you have things you need to work through, but it's scary because you feel like you're the only one and something's wrong with you. That's far from the truth. And I want to shed light on, again, the complexity behind, like, it's just so many different factors. And yeah, we could take ownership for some of them, but there's a lot that we truly can't, like,
Yeah.
and so becoming to a place where you feel like it's safe enough to come out and say, okay, I have these same issues. I need to sit with them too and work with them. And I know I'm not the only one,
Yeah.
and there's nothing less of me or wrong with me that this is part of my story. Um, but I think a lot of people really struggle with getting to that place because it's still such a stigmatized topic. We could say all day long that we don't judge people that struggle with mental health, conditions, but that's not true for most people. Like
Mm,
they're gonna have their preconceived thoughts, and it's scary for someone that's in the middle of it to even tell their closest family, "Hey, I'm really struggling. I think I need to get some help with this." So
right.
my hope is that this book is also going to be just as much of a educational tool to people that don't like truly just don't get it. That they could understand, a little bit better um,
Yeah.
what it's like and how you could support somebody that is, dealing with some of these things.
Jessica, thanks so much for sharing your story here today on the podcast, but also writing the book Blackbird. So, where can we get Blackbird?
If you go to my website, which is drjessicat.com, hopes is that it's going to be in hand by the end of June. But if you pre-order, you will gain immediate access to the full book in a downloadable form, so you can start reading while you're waiting.
Awesome. And one of the questions we ask everybody on the podcast is, right now in your life, what is one thing that you're celebrating and one thing you're anticipating? So, what is Jessica celebrating right now?
I mean, everything with this, honestly, just coming, to be becoming a reality. Like it's still just so surreal. I'm so grateful to have people alongside me that are, making it even more special than I could imagine. My best friend, who's an artist, had custom mugs made for me and gave that to me Monday. So just being able to spread that excitement surrounding Blackbird and just starting to get a slow trickle from people that are already reading it. I had somebody come find me in church that shared,
Mm,
that they had lost someone to suicide. So it's just really crazy to have those connections and knowing like, okay, my story is actually out there and it's already helping people feel less alone. This lady sat on the same row as us for as long as I can remember. Never would have imagined she lost her son to that.
wow.
So it's just I'm excited to meet new people to learn their stories. So celebrating that, yeah, just so much to celebrate, honestly.
Yeah, how about anticipating? And I know you've probably shared it already, but what are you anticipating?
Actually, so shorter term today, like my kids get off in like an hour and a half. So they're super excited about the summer. We have their awards ceremony tonight, and my little boy officially turns 4 this coming Monday. So we got his birthday party this weekend. So a lot of
Wow.
fun things dealing with the family as well that looking forward to.
Awesome. Well, that's super exciting. Well, hey, Jessica, thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll definitely have everything in the show notes, but appreciate you, and I'm so excited for Blackbird to be in our hands and for more people to be impacted by your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Jessica. I know I enjoyed this conversation I got to have with her, and just hearing her share more of her story, hearing her share more of her journey, just makes me appreciate what she's doing with her brand new book, Blackbird, because I believe that this is a story that many people need to hear. There's aspects of her story that might have gripped you, that might have pulled on something that you've experienced, and I really do believe that God wants to bring healing and wholeness to your life, and if there's people in your life that we can start conversations that really matter. And I know this might be the place you're at, but I believe that God wants to lead you somewhere new, but sometimes we have to walk through the things that are hard in order to get there. And that brings us to today's challenge, and the challenge is this: is read your story. In the episode, Jessica talks about opening up some journals that she had not looked at for decades. And what followed next was not only reminder of some of the pain and the struggles and the challenges, but also it opened her eyes to some of the things that she had been dealing with for longer than she even remembered. I think there's power in remembering our story. I think there's power in seeing our story. And I want you to ask yourself a couple questions. So take a journal that you have from a long time ago, or even some pictures, and ask yourself a few questions. What was I carrying during this season? What has God healed in me since? Is there any hurt, disappointment, fear, or grief that I've never dealt with? And what might God be inviting me to bring into the light today? Sometimes it's by going back. It's sometimes by seeing those stories in front of us that we realize that God has something new for us today. So take the challenge, hop over to the broadcast channel on Instagram if you want to share some thoughts there. But so grateful to have you on this journey, and we're so looking forward to being back with you next week with a brand new episode of the Everyday Adventure podcast. But first and foremost, make sure you go over to Dr. Jessica T to pre-order Blackbird today. You're not going to want to miss getting this book, reading this book, and I hope that it makes an impact on your life. But we'll see you next time here on the podcast.